Star Control began with this goofy little drawing. Most of my designs begin this way, with a goofy little drawing. I'm not embarrassed at all to do horrible drawings, but this pretty much says the whole concept. Fighting ships and then having a strategy game. This was how we sort of laid it out. Hi, I'm Paul Reiche.
And I'm Fred Ford.
We created the Star Control series, including Star Control 2, a science fiction action adventure where our own love for science almost sucked all the fun out of the universe. Before Star Control 2, the ur-quan Masters, was Star Control 1, famous battles of the ur-quan alliance conflict. I can't remember, it had a big long name. And we began it in late '88, early '89. And the game industry back then was quite a bit different than it is now and the kind of games people played.
We played Blood Money, Lemmings, Virus.
It was a transition from the days of computers like the Commodore 64 through the PC, which was of course evolving in graphics, up to the Amiga, which was the appearance of this great new computer with new kinds of capabilities. So there was this evolution of game developers working on PCs and very small games to slowly getting larger and larger. But I wanted to do a science fiction game that combined Space Wars, you know, that high-speed action through your fingers, and then also kind of the person versus person hybrid of strategy and action.
Paul had agreed to do 3 games with Accolade. So when I came on board, he actually was trying to run 2 games at the same time.
Disaster.
Star Control 1 was kind of a honeymoon period where we were learning what worked and what didn't work.
And we started with this premise of, let's do the most atomic component of gameplay, which is flying a spaceship and shooting missiles. Pretty much the first thing we made was a 2-player version of Asteroids. But we wanted to get the spaceship combat just right, and so we began building other alien ships. And it was important to us that each alien ship was highly differentiated. And it began this idea of asymmetric PvP gameplay that we've used over and over since then. What it means is, unlike, say, Street Fighter, where your characters are supposedly balanced with one another, our ships weren't balanced at all one-on-one. One could be very weak and one could be very strong, but the idea was your fleet of ships, your selection of ships in total, was as strong as someone else's, and then it came down to which matchup did you find. And one game reviewer called it rock, scissors, vapor, which I thought was a great expression. You know, there's a Battlestar Galactica-like fighter ship. There is a sort of triangular Space Wars style ship, and those end up being like our starting points and foundations for some of the ships. But then ultimately we start telling each other stories about, you know, well, why are these guys launched in fighters? Well, maybe someone's, you know, commanding them to, and who's commanding them? And well, this is the biggest ship, so these guys need to be leading. And then, well, what do we want to call them? No, they're an old alien race, so let's use the word ur, which means old in some ancient language, and quan, because it just sounds cool. So that's how the ur-quan came to be. And then in Star Control 2, we sort of had to figure out why it was all of these races behaved like this in a way that kind of makes sense and is interesting. Why is it that you have an alien race named the ur-quan that want to go around enslaving people? That's a bizarre thing to do. So whereas Star Control 1 is this tight strategy action game, but fairly superficial in terms of story, I think we really wanted to go in and investigate those aliens, and that's what pretty much led to Star Control 2.
We are the ur-quan Corps. We cleanse our destiny. You will soon die.
Star Control 2, from my side, started with taking this idea of how do we expand out into the other aspects of sort of starfaring fantasy. You know, whether it's Star Trek or Battlestar Galactica or even books from the ancient past, Larry Niven and Jack Vance, we have built into us a sense of what people do when they go out to have an adventure in space. So it was figuring out how do we pull all of that together in a way that we can actually implement, and then what are the parts that turned out really boring and how do we throw them away and replace them, because there's quite a bit of that too. So I want to give credit where credit is due. Fred did not go down this particular rabbit hole with me about planet generation. You have to remember, in 1991, there was no scientifically proven exoplanet. Now there's thousands. But we kind of had a sense of what they could be made of. You know, rock, lithium, hydrogen, helium. I decided the right thing to do was to scientifically correctly define these new worlds, these new planets, using very limited scientific knowledge I had. We sort of started with like, well, we know the brightness of the star, the color of the star, that gives us the energy flowing off of it. I have this concise encyclopedia of science and technology that I go look for equations in. And I said, okay, so we'll create this theoretical ball of chemicals and elements, and then we'll start shining light on it. And that light will volatilize the lighter elements and chemicals. So like the helium will go, it'll enter the atmosphere, the hydrogen, and then the carbon dioxide will volatilize. And at that point, as it's warming up, when the carbon dioxide goes, all of a sudden the planet becomes a greenhouse and it starts heating up very fast. And as it heats up, other things volatilizes and you've got Venus, this incredibly hot planet. And if the sun radiation falling on the surface of the planet fell below a certain level, it would maybe volatilize hydrogen, but then that was it. It was an ice ball. As much as I tried to program and calculate a cool world where you'd have, some liquid water and some, vaporous water. Nope, we got ice balls and Venuses and nothing in between. And what I was trying to do is recreate like global warming models, which are the single most complicated thing in the world. And so we did a lot of work on this, and I was seeing the writing on the wall. And I think there just came a point where I had to say, Fred, this ain't working.
Well, did the description just now sound interesting? Even if we went to all that work to accurately recreate what it was to make an atmosphere and to have totally accurately modeled, the user would not appreciate any of that. You'll notice a pattern here. When I don't believe that something is worth it, I'll let him do it.
I fall for it every time, like Lucy in the football. So we sat back and we said, okay, we got to make cool planets.
We still needed to tell a story, and that meant that some of the planets had to be special in some ways beyond just procedural generation.
I think the problem with games that focus purely on procedural generation is that it's impressive at first and you're sort of awed by what they've done, but then the differentiation and kind of the meaning just declines. We just cut through the chase. You've got, Treasure World, you've got the Ruby World, you've got the Cracked Planet. All of a sudden they become stories. I went to the Cracked Planet and I dodged the magma chasm, or I went to the Ruby World and was blinded by the glittering light of the star off the surface of the planet. That sounds good. Yeah, I'll go there. And we got this really cool rainbow planet that didn't look like anything sensible. So we're like, what is that? Like, maybe that's like an alien waste dump where they put crazy alien waste that's rainbow colored. A lot of the material of like the elements and the chemicals that do occur in space, we ended up using those as generated pickups on the surface of the planet. So there was enough of this reality-ish material to make you feel like you could suspend your disbelief that yes, there's a Ruby planet and yes, there's zirconium down there. It's enough real to make you enjoy it and not think like this is nonsense. So the controls in Star Control, you have buttons that are sort of rotate left, rotate right, thrust forward, fire, and special. However, they introduced a very specific problem when we translated them to the PC.
The reason it was a problem is because we really wanted to support two people playing on the same keyboard. As they were using their keys in quick succession, and sometimes multiple keys would be pressed simultaneously. On PCs, that's in theory allowed on their keyboard, but what we discovered fairly quickly was that each keyboard could be different, and different keys could be locked out. So somebody might be turning left but couldn't thrust at the same time.
We didn't experience this keyboard problem for months, maybe almost a year. And we would play every day. And it wasn't until we actually started sending versions of our game out to be played elsewhere that we started hearing these reports of problems that we'd never seen. So when you think about what you could have installed on your computer now, it's software. Back then, it was almost all specialized hardware that really differentiated machines. And so it was this complete flea circus of possibilities.
We solved it in the easiest way we knew how, which was to supply an additional program along with the game that allowed them to probe their keyboard and see which keys could all be pressed simultaneously without locking somebody out. And so they were able to configure their keyboard, hopefully in ways that worked for them so that they weren't playing Twister on the keyboard. That allowed them to then play without interfering with each other.
Success is about moving people, about having what you do affect their lives in a way that's positive. And so when we would get letters back from people talking about how, for example, a hurricane hit their house and they had to go live with their friend and it was miserable, but the thing that got them through it was playing Star Control with their friend. That's worth its weight in gold to how you feel in your life.
Well, Star Control 2, in Star Control 1 have always been near and dear to our hearts. It's the first things we worked on, the first things we poured our passion in together. We have some diehard fans as a result of those two games, and we wanted to service them and lay the groundwork for a return.
So the ur-quan Masters project, the open source release, the game we created as Star Control 2, that really kept our game alive in the doldrums between, say, 2001 or 2002, and then 2011, when our games began to be sold again through Good Old Games, known as GOG, which is an electronic distributor of classic games. So we formed a corporation of Toys for Bob. As the years went on and we started working on games like Pandemonium or The Horde, we sort of got this idea from Activision, hey, why don't you make a game for the Wii? Why don't you make a game for kids? And hey, we've got the Spyro license now, would you like to use that? So we said, yes, we can do this. We love Spyro, the Wii's awesome, and we can make the greatest thing ever. And that turned into Skylanders, which we couldn't have done without Activision because it required factories and thousands of people and skills in making plastic and the ability to risk tens of millions of dollars on inventory. But ultimately, it all paid off.
I think if you work on what you love, and we truly do love Star Control, you are much happier with your life in general.
I would say the biggest lesson is live up to the promise you make to yourself and your partners about what it is you're creating. Don't let reality intrude any more than it absolutely has to. Because, and I'm not the first person to say this, success lasts. Mistakes you'll also remember, you'll never be able to fix them. If you have to go through pain, if you have to go through some short-term disappointment with folks, in order to achieve something great, something that matters and that you believe in, do that. People will forget that pain. People will forgive you, but you will have that for the rest of your life, and so will everybody else who's played your game. So make those sacrifices. That was a little abstract. It made sense to me, but I don't know if it made sense to you guys.